Destiny's catalyst, Josephine de Beauharnais, the meeting that changed history. While the French Revolution raged and the armies of the Republic fought for survival, a different kind of revolution was taking place in the drawing rooms and salons of Paris, a revolution of society and ambition. The rise of Napoleon Bonaparte was a purely military and political phenomenon, but the stability of his personal life and the crucial acceleration of his early career were inextricably linked to a singular, elegant figure, Marie-Joseph Rose Tacher de la Pagère, known to history simply as Josephine. Their meeting was not an accident, but an event engineered by the tumultuous forces of the Directory, a chance encounter that irrevocably altered the trajectory of the young general and the fate of Europe. Josephine's life before Napoleon was a drama worthy of the age. Born on the island of Martinique in the French Caribbean, she was a Creole, a product of the colonial elite whose family owned a sugar plantation. She was transplanted to Paris in the early 1880s for an arranged marriage to Alexander de Beauharnais, a young viscount, a member of the liberal high aristocracy. The marriage was deeply unhappy, marked by Alexander's infidelities and his coldness, but it produced two children, Eugene and Hortense, who would later play vital roles in the Napoleonic dynasty. The revolution initially seemed to favor Alexander de Beauharnais. He was a liberal nobleman who embraced the revolutionary cause, serving as a general in the Republican Army and even becoming president of the National Assembly. Yet during the violent paranoia of the Reign of Terror, his noble origins and military misfortunes made him a target. Both Josephine and Alexander were imprisoned in the infamous Carme prison. Alexander was guillotined on July 23, 1994, just days before the fall of Robespierre, a fate Josephine narrowly escaped due to the Thermidorian reaction. Josephine emerged from the terror, not only widowed, but financially ruined and emotionally hardened. She was a survivor, a woman acutely aware of the fragility of life and fortune in the new republic. She possessed a refined charm, an innate elegance, and a natural social grace that distinguished her from the crude political nouveau riche that dominated the post-terror scene known as the Directory. She became adept at navigating this society, using her connections and her allure to survive and secure a fragile social position. Her small salon became a hub for the powerful and the ambitious men of the Directory, a place where political deals were made and futures were decided. Her most critical connection was with Paul Barras, a former revolutionary firebrand turned one of the 5 directors of France and the most powerful man in the new regime. Barras was a figure of decadent corruption, but he recognized and cultivated Josephine's unique social utility. She became his mistress and his close confidant, a woman who lent an air of sophistication and legitimacy to Barras's otherwise coarse circle. It was through Barras that the obscure artillery general Napoleon Bonaparte would finally cross paths with the widow de Beauharnais, a meeting that neither could have predicted would redefine their lives and the history of the continent. The encounter between Napoleon and Josephine is often described in history as the result of fate, but it was undeniably engineered by the harsh political realities of the Directory. The meeting is traditionally placed in late 1795, following the brutal 13 Vendémiaire uprising. This royalist revolt had threatened to overthrow the Directory, and its survival depended on a swift, decisive military response. The Directory's leader, Paul Barras, desperate for a commander who would not hesitate to fire upon French citizens, chose the young artillery general, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon executed the task ruthlessly, spraying the streets of Paris with grape shot and crushing the rebellion, an act that saved the Republic and earned him the gratitude and trust of Barras. As a reward for his decisive action, Barras immediately promoted Napoleon to commander-in-chief of the Army of the Interior, a position of enormous political power, and provided him access to the highest social circles of the Directory, including Barras's own salon, where Josephine held court. The popular story, often cited, is that Napoleon's initial connection to Josephine came when her son, Eugène de Beauharnais, visited Napoleon to ask for the return of his father's sword, a sentimental relic confiscated after the Viscount's execution. Touched by the boy's devotion, Napoleon granted the request, and the grateful Josephine soon visited him to express her thanks. Regardless of the exact circumstances of their first conversation, the connection between the young, ambitious general and the elegant society widow was immediate and overwhelming for Napoleon. Josephine was 6 years older than Napoleon. She was 32 and he was 26 and possessed all the social grace and sophistication he lacked. Napoleon, the outsider, the serious military strategist, the man who dressed poorly and spoke with a thick Corsican accent, was immediately captivated by her charm, her famed Caribbean sensuality, and her air of aristocratic refinement, a quality he deeply yearned for in his ascent. For Josephine, the attraction was more pragmatic initially. Napoleon was certainly not her usual type of suitor. He was short, intense, financially modest at the time, and emotionally raw, a stark contrast to the polished men of the old regime she was accustomed to. However, Napoleon possessed something none of her current lovers had: a future. He was Barras's protégé, a military hero who had just saved the government, and his rapidly rising star promised power and financial stability, a necessity for a widow with 2 children and mounting debts. She saw in him a means of security, a lifeline out of her precarious financial and social position. Their courtship was intense and brief, defined by Napoleon's overwhelming passion. His letters to her, even during this early period, were torrents of volcanic emotion, a dramatic contrast to the cold, calculated precision of his military dispatches. Napoleon's intense passion for Josephine became the emotional core of his spectacular military success in Italy. The letters he wrote from the front lines were torrents of volcanic emotion, a dramatic contrast to the cold, calculated precision of his military dispatches. He wrote constantly, demanding replies, expressing agonizing jealousy and profound declarations of love. "I don't love you, not at all. I absolutely detest you. You are a villainous, silly, stupid, a Cinderella," he wrote in one famously contradictory letter, only to continue with desperate pleas for her to join him. This emotional intensity fueled his energy on the battlefield. He fought battles with a fierce urgency, driven by his desire to return to her. However, while Napoleon was carving out his legend through victories like Lodi and Arcole, Josephine was enjoying the decadent social life of Paris. She rarely answered his letters, and when she did, they were short and lacked the reciprocal passion he craved. She engaged in several affairs, most notably with the handsome cavalry officer Hippolyte Charles. Josephine did not initially appreciate the historical significance of the man she had married, or the depth of his obsessive need for her. She saw him primarily as a powerful ticket to financial and social stability, not as her great love or the future ruler of France. Despite this emotional distance, Josephine played an absolutely crucial and often understated role in Napoleon's early political success. Her social skills were peerless. She bridged the gap between the rough, provincial Corsican general and the sophisticated political elite of the Directory. Her salon was the perfect setting for Napoleon to cultivate political allies and soothe the suspicions of rivals. She lent him an air of aristocratic legitimacy and refinement, a quality he desperately lacked and needed to conquer the Parisian political world, which was ruled as much by manners and connections as by military might. The true test of their relationship came after Napoleon's return from the Egyptian campaign in 1799. He arrived unexpectedly and discovered the full extent of her infidelity with Hippolyte Charles. Napoleon was utterly devastated, his passion turning instantly to cold fury. He initially resolved to divorce her, a personal crisis that threatened to derail his burgeoning political ambitions. He was the hero of France, but his personal life was in ruins. Josephine, however, proved herself to be a master strategist in this personal war. She barricaded herself and her children in her room, weeping hysterically and refusing to eat. Her children, Eugene and Hortense, pleaded with Napoleon to forgive their mother. Facing this wall of emotional manipulation and realizing the political damage an immediate, scandalous divorce would cause, Napoleon relented. He forgave her on condition that their relationship would henceforth be based on ambition and dynastic necessity rather than purely on passion. The marriage was saved, but it was fundamentally altered. This crisis was a profound turning point for both of them. Napoleon sublimated his wounded passion into his political career, focusing entirely on the coup of 18 Brumaire, which he executed shortly thereafter to seize control of the Directory. For Josephine, the fear of losing Napoleon and returning to poverty cemented her loyalty. She finally understood the immense historical destiny of the man she had married and embraced her role as his indispensable political partner, a relationship forged not in romance but in the fire of ambition. The final phase of Josephine's role in the Napoleonic era began with her coronation. In 1804, when Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of the French, he insisted that Josephine be crowned Empress alongside him. This was a profoundly symbolic act, legitimizing his rule by presenting his dynasty as complete and respected. The famous image of the coronation, when Napoleon places the crown on Josephine's head, captures the moment she reached the zenith of her power. A power rooted not in political maneuvering, but in the validation she provided to the emperor's imperial ambition. She mastered the role of empress, presiding over court functions with grace and elegance, qualities Napoleon himself could never fully acquire. She made the new regime look old and respectable, a vital service to a dynasty that was only just born from the chaos of the revolution. Yet the inherent flaw in their salvaged marriage quickly became the central tragedy of the empire. Josephine was unable to bear Napoleon a legitimate male heir. She had provided him with 2 children from her previous marriage, Eugene and Hortense, both of whom Napoleon adored and utilized within his regime. But the lack of a direct biological successor was an ever-growing threat to the stability and permanence of the new empire. Napoleon believed his dynasty needed to be secured by his own bloodline, a pressure that became unbearable as his military success made him the ruler of the continent.
The decision was devastating, but it was ultimately a political calculation of the highest order. Napoleon resolved to divorce Josephine in order to marry a woman who could provide him an heir. The separation was conducted with immense public gravity and private sorrow. In a moving ceremony before the assembled court, Josephine displayed profound dignity, accepting her fate for the sake of France and the dynasty. It was a heartbreaking end to a legendary partnership, one defined by their mutual rise from the ashes of the Terror. In 1810, Napoleon married Marie-Louise, the Archduchess of Austria, a direct descendant of the powerful Habsburg dynasty, a marriage that symbolized his complete acceptance by the old crowned heads of Europe. Marie-Louise quickly bore him the desired heir, Napoleon II, the King of Rome. But the emotional void left by Josephine was never truly filled. Napoleon was often observed writing letters to Josephine, even after his new marriage, seeking her counsel and affection. Josephine retired to the Château de Malmaison, retaining the title of Empress and remaining an object of Napoleon's enduring affection and respect. She lived to witness Napoleon's catastrophic defeat in Russia, his temporary fall, and his exile to Elba. Her death in 1814 was a profound shock to Napoleon, who was still exiled. Upon his final return to France during the 100 Days campaign, the first place he visited was Malmaison. The legacy of Josephine de Beauharnais is complex. She was a survivor, a social architect, and a woman of immense charm. She was not a great political thinker or a military strategist, but she was the catalyst of destiny, the one person who provided the crucial social and emotional launchpad that allowed the brilliant but rough General Bonaparte to step confidently from the bloodshed of the revolution into the polished court of European power. She was the essential link between the old world of the aristocracy and the new world of the empire, a union that ultimately failed, but whose initial success changed history forever.